I would really want to welcome you all to our first joint RPIC CIPMM event in a couple of years, and I can't say enough about what a fabulous topic we've got today. I'm going to do the land acknowledgement, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Catherine. I'd like to start by paying respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. I acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. I pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. I acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and I honor the courageous leaders, past, present, and future. And I would pass on the same land acknowledgement to all of you out there in the unceded areas that you are residing. I'm going to turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you, Caroline. Just a few words on RPIC. L'Institut des biens immobiliers, l'IBIC, est une organisation à but non lucratif dont les principaux objectifs sont de développer et favoriser des normes professionnelles élevées de gestion des biens immobiliers au sein du secteur public fédéral et de fournir un forum d'échange, d'information et d'amélioration continue. L'IBIC offre des opportunités de réseautage, mais aussi, comme c'est le cas aujourd'hui avec l'ICAGM, des opportunités de formation et de développement de carrière sous forme d'ateliers ou de séminaires. RPIC supported the RP community when we possible without support of its own partners. So just a quick thank you to CBRE, Collier Project Leaders, Target Facility Solutions, and Horizons, and our private sector supporting partner regions. You can visit the RPIC website or follow us along on our social media for more information about upcoming events in 2023. Lastly, a warm thank you to our panelists for joining us today and for contributing their time and expertise to the communities in procurement and real property management. Also, thank you to Treasury Board Secretariat for access to these facilities, and CIPMM for being such a great partner in organizing this event for everyone today. Thank you.
Just as RPIC, we really at CIPMM are trying to do more and more different ways of providing professional development and learning opportunities to our community. Just as RPIC, we have a website, and just like RPIC, I think all of the people involved in RPIC and CIPMM would say probably the same thing. And that's if you have a really good idea or a topic or a session that you'd like to have, send us a link, send us a note, send us an email, and we'll work away at that. I'm not sure when. We've got lots of different things coming up in both respective communities, but I think we all are really charged in trying to further the professional development and learning of our respective communities. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Scott Hamilton, and who will introduce the panel. Scott will moderate the panel. He'll take questions that he's got a few prepared, and then of course we'll be taking questions from the audience both in person and virtually. This is a bit of an experiment, so we are trying to figure out, how we get those virtual questions in and how we get those in-room questions out. So bear with us a little bit as we sort of try and figure this out. I think this is the first of a hybrid event of this sort, and I suspect it's going to be one that we're going to follow again and again, because it allows all of us to reach all of you out, no matter where you are currently working. So Scott is the Director General of Real Property at Library and Archives Canada and the past President of the Ottawa chapter of the International Facilities Management Association, IFMA. He's leading the development of the Library and Archives' first real property portfolio strategy to identify corporate real estate issues, risks, and requirements for the next 25 years, as well as the $334 million Atasoke project, a federal municipal partnership to construct a new joint facility for the Library and Archives and the Ottawa Public Library. I turn it over to Scott.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. And thank you everybody for joining us today. It's a real pleasure and an honor to be here today, moderating this esteemed group of experts in the construction and government of Canada real property field and procurement field. So we're lucky to have these folks with us today. I'm told that this is the first ever event of its kind where we have government officials sitting with contracting and project authorities at a table to speak about a project of this nature. So that's great. And these people, each of these members have a vast wealth of knowledge, and they are leaders in the project management and the construction field and facilities management field, of course, Brad. Brad, by the way, if you haven't heard, is a singer who once sang at the Toronto Blue Jays game for the opening ceremony. And I just want to recognize that right off the bat. I'm told that I got $100 for being the first. So, now that I've embarrassed Brad, I'm going to pass it over to Brad and let him introduce himself. Thank you.
Well, I just in case anyone wants to book me, I'm really expensive. And so thanks for that. It's Brad Coulter. I work with Equans Canada. We're an international company that does service and facility management all over the world in about 20 countries. And we're really proud to be part of the Gatineau project. And we're going to be your partner in managing a facility long past the end of my career, and so well into 2050. I come from a public service background. I worked in the Ontario Public Service for 15 years in infrastructure management and other roles, and also had a secondment briefly with Parks Canada. So glad to be here amongst former colleagues. Thank you.
Over to you.
Hi, I'm Nathalie Etier. I'm the project director for Gatineau 2. I work for Scott. I've been working in this project since about 2016-17. I've been responsible over time for the planning, for drafting a very lengthy and complex project agreement. I like to say 1,836 pages, but who's counting? Exactly. I was also responsible for the implementation during design construction, and now I'm responsible for the operation of both the existing new facility and the new facility that was just constructed.
Hello, my name is Paul Marion. I'm a construction manager with PCL Constructors here in Ottawa. I had the privilege of leading a great group of builders and designers as part of the design build component of the project. I've been involved in numerous builds in my 20 years with PCL, and I must say this definitely tops the list for a number of reasons, but principally for the partnership that this group was able to develop, and in the end made for a very successful project. So I'm very proud of that and looking forward to sharing some of that with everyone today.
Hi, I'm Olivier Caron. I'm a manager with PSPC in the P3 procurement team. Been doing construction procurement for about 12 years now, so I've been very lucky to work on great projects like the new High Commission in London, for example, a new High Commission in Abuja, and like Paul said, I think this new project is one of the key highlights of my career. So I still have a lot left, but I think it's hard to beat this one.
Hi everyone, my name is Amy Kaznikas. I'm an Assistant Vice President at Plenary Americas. I've worked at Plenary for around 8 years, and I've been in the P3 industry for around 10 years now. On the Gatineau 2 project in particular, I have the responsibility and the pleasure to lead the private sector consortium, overseeing the design, construction, and operational aspects of the project. Just a quick note for those that aren't familiar with Plenary, we're a long-term investor and equity financer and lead developer on P3 projects in particular. We have 59 projects across North America. This one is my favorite, so I'm happy to be sitting in front of you guys to talk about this today.
Thank you very much, Amy, and all of our panel members. If you want more information about each of them, their bios, their full bio is available on the Canadian Institute for Procurement and Material Management website. I'm not sure if it's on the RPIC one as well. More information is available. I just want to expand on, Brad mentioned that it's longer than, it's a long-term, it'll last long beyond. It's 30 years, longer than a lot of marriages these days. Really important to have a great partnership to start this process off on the right foot. So we're going to kick off with the very first question that we've pre-scripted for our panel members. We want to make sure right off the bat that we're addressing the benefits of a P3 for the Government of Canada and why we chose a P3 for this model. And we'll start off with Olivier, and then I think Natalie will jump in. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Actually, the way we decided to go with the P3 model is it's a long process. The key aspect, I think we do well in the federal government. We actually go through a formalized process. I know some jurisdiction, it's really politicians or high senior official that decided because they think it's going to work best, but we actually have a method to do that. So since 2012, we have any infrastructure project above 100 million has to go through what we call the procurement options analysis, and we'll decide whether or not it's going to be design build, traditional models, or something different like a P3, or the new models like project alliancing, for example. And usually, and that used to be done by PPP Canada, but since they have left, PSPC had no property branch on my services has taken over part of that role for PSPC, and other departments can sign an MOU and ask PSPC to support them with that. So usually once we figure out it might become a P3, when we have a few options left, then we start to become integrated with the analysis. So ultimately, we do a value for money analysis before we decide it's going to confirm it's going to be a P3 analysis. It's really about ensuring that we get the best values, not necessarily the cheapest price for what we're building. And I think that's a key element of P3s, is really getting the best value for the duration of the process, not just a lower construction price if it means costing more for the operations. So that's really, we could talk about that for over an hour, but to summarize, that's how we get to the P3. The last one of P3 is design procurement. I'll just maybe point out a few of the key differences between that and the design build contractor, design bid build. So one of the key elements is during the procurement phase, we have what we call commercially confidential meetings, which I think can be adapted to essentially any large procurement, not just for infrastructure. And that's really collaboration during the RFP. So we have sessions with the bidders. It's confidential, and that thing is binding, but we have a really open conversation. So because it's a P3, they have to come up with a solution. We don't give them a design for them to build, we give them output specification. So the design we can see from the 3 bidders, and I can talk confidential, but they might be very different or very similar in different ways. And they want to make sure, the bidders want to make sure that it's going to be acceptable to us. And on our side, we want to make sure that whatever you're building is really going with the intent we had in our specification. So those conversations, I think, really help bidders come up with a solution that they'll know will meet our requirements. And for us, it's without telling them, no, it's not going to work. We might help them steer in the right direction if we, maybe our own fault, we didn't explain it properly in our specification. So, so that's one of the key differences during the procurement. Also, the P3 model, for those who don't know, we share the risk. So most of the time when we do the traditional construction model, the Crown is going to own most of the risk. We hire general contractors, so they manage the schedule with most of everything else. There's going to be a risk that the Crown retains. Under the P3 model, we look at every risk and we assign it to the party who's best positioned to manage it, which is a key element of the P3 as well. And for the private sector, sometimes it means that they can charge more, but they have to assume it, but they can lead to opportunities. If they find an innovative way to reduce costs or improve quality, because they have to manage it for 3 years, for example. So that's where we go back to the value for money. So other than that, quickly, there's private financing, which you never see up at P3 as far as I know. So Amy's, she has a lot of money, not sure where it comes from, but they finance the project. It could be short-term, long-term. We may pay, depending on the project, we pay a big amount. Essentially completion, sometimes to the full operations term. And also one of the key elements that's helped my client is that we have fixed fees for the duration of the project. So when we signed the contract, we knew exactly how much we were going to pay at the end of the construction and every month for the next 30 years, including life cycle. So that's a key element, a big advantage. I think the only unknown is really inflation, because we adjust the inflation rate. So that's really an overview of the key differences between the annual. Like I said, I couldn't talk about it for the entire afternoon, but understand it.
So for us, once we went through all of the analysis and the process that Olivier described, what we looked at LAC was really, because we're a small organization, because resources are limited, the P3 provided us with cost certainty. We knew exactly at financial close how much we were going to pay for the project as a whole, which includes the facility management and operations over the 30-year. But it was a long-term cost predictability as well. We didn't have to question ourselves. We knew that we would have the funding moving forward to allow us to maintain this facility. The consideration about cost was important in addition to the risk, but just by going through a P3 model, we were able to, it allowed us to have a contract that was about 13% lower than any other design bid build. So that was another consideration. But the complexity of the P3, like we're talking very positively, which it is, let me tell you it is, but it also meant that we had to do our homework in advance. It meant that back in 2016, 17, we had to start thinking about the project and what we wanted as a result. We had to engage our stakeholders. We had to know, we had to be able to draft in legal and technical terms, what do we need, not necessarily what do we want. And that was a bit of a complexity, but overall, I think that Paul, Amy, Brad said it. I think it was a good learning experience for all of us at LEC.
Thank you very much, Olivia and Alec. So now moving on to the second question. So knowing the costs involved in bidding on a P3 project, and they are substantial. What would you, Amy, Brad, and Paul like to say in terms of what makes a P3 an enticing procurement model for your organizations, and how do you decide when to bid on the project?
Yeah, I'll start the conversation off and I'll let Paul and Brad get into the details in terms of their organization's approach. In terms of Plenary's approach to investing in a project, I think, like I said, we are specialized P3 developers, so it needs to be a P3. But under the P3 umbrella, there are various subtypes of P3s. We're most interested in the design, build, finance, and most importantly, the maintenance aspect. There are many P3s out there that are focused on the design, build, finance. As a long-term equity investor and an active manager throughout the operational phase of our projects, that and the maintenance is quite important for us. So, you know, that's from a Plenary perspective, that's what we're looking for. And I think it echoes a little bit of what Olivia was saying earlier too, in terms of appropriate risk transfer. So what we look for in documents is a clear understanding from the government and authority side that the risk that's being transferred over to us is the one that we're most able to bear. And in doing so, we're able to produce better value for money. So, you know, cheaper ability to build projects and doing that faster. The detriment of, I guess, not looking at that and maybe not allocating the risk appropriately would mean for us potentially adding contingencies where, you know, from an authority perspective, you wouldn't want that to be the case. And in the worst case scenario, we would consider not bidding a project where that risk allocation just doesn't make sense for us. Another aspect I think we look at quite closely is clear political support. I think actually this project is very good example of having that. We need a project champion and we need to see that that person or that team is supported and the project is therefore in a position to be better supported through the various phases, the long phases that we have on this project. So that's one thing that we saw very early on in the project with Natalie's team and Scott. Although through our RFP phase, we're not able to be as, I guess, personal now, or at that point, we were still able to see that there was a project champion and someone pushing the project along. I think that really provides us comfort when we're going through this RFP phase, which can be arduous and expensive for those getting involved. One final aspect, I think, and I think actually Olivia already mentioned this is on the outcomes in the project agreements. We would like to see as not as prescriptive and more outcome based. And I think that's another key fundamental aspect of engaging in a P3 is you're allowing the private sector to bring the expertise that you want us there for. So in being, you know, obviously taking a look at what you need to have prescriptive, putting those in there. But if that's not looking kind of at the bigger picture, I think where you're going to get the most value for money is allowing us to be creative and being able to solve the problems that, you know, we might be facing.
So.
And maybe I'll build on that. A lot of our concerns or a lot of what attracts us to a P3 are very similar to Plenary. You know, it's very expensive. We don't just wake up one morning and say, yeah, we're going to pursue this P3. Most of the time, we've been tracking them for years. You know, we're considering a lot of things like the partners that are available, both from a design perspective, from a subcontractor perspective, and even internally within our company. We want to make sure the right people are available for those projects. So that's a significant consideration on our side. We look at the size and complexity of the project. You know, if you're getting into something where similar to this, to a certain degree on the FM side, where you know, you're working on an existing building and things of that nature, that'll certainly change how we look at it and what potential risks are that we need to guard against. Also, there's a substantial amount of large infrastructure work in the pipeline currently. And what we're seeing and what we have to be, you know, look at and make sure we have the ability to do is we have the securities and bonding capacity, not only ourselves, but our sub-trade community to be able to cover the risk on all these large projects. And it's significant. It's a challenge to come for sure. Similar to what Plenary would look at, and same with I'm sure Equans is the commercial terms. What do they look like? How is the risk transfer structured? Particularly, you know, the model does and is innovating and changing. You see now progressive design builds, that process coming out. And, you know, I think in the future, we're going to have to look a little bit about how the risk transfer when it comes to escalation and inflation and things like that are managed within the P3s. Because as Amy says, if things like that aren't clear, then we're going to carry contingency, or, you know, in some cases, we won't respond. For LAC in particular, you know, the timing is great for us, so we were able to take it on as a project. It was one of the first federal P3s that was out there, so we wanted to try to experience that, and hopefully we can do more. It was a complex project, but at the same time, it did allow us to innovate because of very unique things like the ASRS. It's the storage and retrieval system that was a requirement of the project. It allowed us to engage with a good partner in Dematic, and allow our designers and them to really come up with a solution that put us, you know, set us aside from our competitors. So that's one thing we look for as well. And I'll say it again, I'm going to repeat the CCMs, the commercially confidential meetings. We had a good feel from the discussions that we had there. They were very frank and direct, and we're able to go back and really get a good sense of what LAC's interpretation was of the PSOS, and we're able to, you know, tailor our submission to it. So it made a big difference up front. Pass it on to Brad.
Thanks, Paul. A couple of things from the operator perspective. You know, while you're just dating Paul and PCL, you'll be married to Equans for 30 years, right? And so, you know, for us, the cost and revenue certainty of a 33-year contract, including the existing building start, is really important, right? So that's very attractive when you're able to go into the marketplace and see that you've got an opportunity that's quite literally going to outlive some of your careers in your company. So the cost and revenue certainty that Olivier talked about as being attractive to government is also attractive to the private sector, particularly to us as the asset manager on an ongoing basis. Secondarily, what's really attractive for us is there's not only a brand new building being built, which is really common and procurement, and particularly P3, but there's the existing element of the existing building. And so you have a 25-year-old building that's beautiful and in great shape. And so, you know, we can then apply our expertise in life cycle and operations management to that building, quantify the risk for ourselves in terms of the kind of cost and revenue we think we can drive out of that. And then that becomes a really attractive thing, because for the most part of the P3 marketplace, it's new buildings, right? I would also suggest that there's a tremendous opportunity out there for retrofits and other kinds of models in the P3 industry. You know, in government, you've got an enormous fleet of buildings all over the country, really, in various states of age. And so you might want to look at those as much from a new build perspective as from a retrofit perspective. Thirdly, at our core, we're an energy company. So Equans came out of the Energy Group, which is the largest energy company in the world. And so one of the things that's really attractive about this particular opportunity is the ability to meet the energy targets and the greening targets that are provided for, but actually to exceed them and drive revenue from that for ourselves as well. And so not only are we presented with the energy goals and targets of the procurement opportunity, but because of our expertise, we think we can do better. And so we see an energy opportunity there, and nobody complains when the building is greener and it uses less energy than maybe that's what you wanted. Lastly, and what I think is really important is you rarely do you have an opportunity to look at life cycle and operational management in two contexts. And so the complexity of this particular opportunity between the brand new building and the older building means that not only are you operating a brand new building and making sure that it's going to do what it's supposed to, but you're bringing that older building up to snuff. And so you've got two opportunities that you blend together. And that's what I think is really, really a unique opportunity for Equans in this sense. And to be honest, shows really well for us in the marketplace in terms of our ability to balance those two priorities, which can be competing. 25 years is a long way between the start of one building and the start of the next.
Thank you very much to Brad, Amy, and Paul. So moving on, so Natalie, we launched this RFP shortly after publication of the Greening Government Strategy. And then now we've got an additional change to the Greening Government Strategy, and we know that they're probably going to make more changes as they go along to the Greening Government Strategy. But what I want to know from you is that Greening Government Strategy, that first Greening Government Strategy, changed the work, the place, the way that we were working, the way that you were planning for this project. And can you address what you had to do to adjust to that in the weeks and months leading up to the RFP being posted?
Yeah. Actually, the Green Government strategy was literally published weeks before we were planning to launch the RFP. This being said, I recall a really interesting conversation with Nick, the director at the Center for Greening Government, trying to explain to him that we were trying to build a 21,500 cubic meter fridge to store collection, and that maybe he should change the Greening Government strategy because it would not be possible for us. This being said, I've been converted since then. I've learned from Nick quite a bit, and we were able to rely on the Center for Greening Government expertise as well as NRCan, National Resources Canada. They really came through for us. They rallied the troop. They helped us. They assessed the feasibility of building a net zero carbon facility for us, a brand new one, but also reaching a 80% GHG reduction in the existing preservation center without compromising costs, with ensuring also that the private partner would not just convert everything to electricity, which would translate into large electricity bills at the end of the month. So they helped us develop a strategy that would allow to rewrite some portion of the project agreement. Remember, 1,836 pages that we had to rewrite. And at the time that this came about, the RFP should have been airtight and we should have been able to just move forward, but we rewrote some of those pieces. This is a success story for LAC, seriously. This being said, I think we also need to talk about the objectives of the project at the onset. Some of the objectives that we had was to promote economic growth, provide value for money for Canadians, very important to us, foster sustainable development, and also urban integration. So we had those things in mind at the beginning. We were already planning to reduce our environmental footprint. We were creating some welcoming space for the community around us. We have an interpretive trail. We have the species at risk that were a consideration as well. But taking a step back, I mean, we always have lessons learned on every single project. I think those objectives covered the strict minimum that we could have covered. If I was to do this again, I would include, Indigenous related objectives. I would include objectives related to the equity of the workforce during the design and construction phase, as well as during the operational phase. There's so many other things that would be included that go above and beyond what the green government strategy addresses. So
Thank you, Natalie. And my apologies if I didn't have my microphone on for that last question. So a lot of really important elements there. We're learning. Library and Archives Canada is as a new custodian is learning how to lead these kinds of projects. Natalie's done a great job. Building on that, so obviously the sustainability, greening, overall environmental approach, really important for us in this site. We have a species at risk on site as well, the Western Forest Frog, and so that was a significant challenge leading into this project as well. The team did a fantastic job of working with Climate Change Canada to address that issue. But what we want to do in this next phase is get into the socioeconomic impacts of a project of this nature. And we'll start off with Olivia and then pass it over to our partners.
So that's, of course, like I said earlier, the value for money is extremely important. We are spending public money. So the P3 in itself should have good value for money. So the way we implemented that in the project approach was to, so once we had that figured out, we worked with the private partner. Once we signed the contract, to again optimize it. So we also, one of the key, maybe it's really key to get to know the project. Usually the lawyers, we don't use standard contracts, so the lawyers draft most of it. But Nathalie and I spent a lot of time, especially when people at the working level drafting the terms of the contract, and I think it paid off really well because the technicals we had, the output specs, were working fairly well. There was little opportunities for Paul complaining after more money. So we did really well, and we also worked with. Sometimes we write something that doesn't really work with their design. So instead of just getting a claim, we work together to find a way to make it work for the project at the lowest cost possible, at the lowest impact. So that was a good way, I guess, to protect the socioeconomic aspect. But I have a good story, I think, to share with the the environment. So we had those of all the projects saw, we had the LEED silver target for this project. But ultimately, if you saw it on LinkedIn or the LEC website, we reached LEED gold. So because of their risk transfer, that risk of reaching LEED silver was with PCL and plenary. But ultimately, to manage that risk, they purchased or they planned for extra credits. And at some point, Scott, during a meeting, saw that we were extremely close to LEED gold. So we said, why don't we just grab those extra credits? And Paul was very enthusiastic. We had that busy, so we decided to do it, but it would have been fairly expensive because Paul had a buffer to protect his own interests. But when we say, okay, we're going to move to LEED gold, we were using his buffer for our own interests pretty much. So he was losing it. So losing that sort of. So we ended up negotiating with them, and that's where I think the collaborative aspect of Peter is extremely beneficial. He owned the risk, but we accepted that if we use his buffer, not to spend too much money on LEED gold, we would also assume the additional risk for LEED gold, and that way I think it satisfied all the parties. Negotiations went fairly well, and we ended up with LEED gold for only the actual amount again, but it's very, very low compared to what the acquisition plan. And overall, because of the collaborative aspect of the how we manage on both sides, just the crowd, we did that, and it was collaborative for every party. And the way we wrote the PA and managed it, the construction costs for the amendments were less than 1%. That, from my point of view, it's a huge success on that.
I guess on to me. So yeah, the lead discussions were long, but fruitful in the end. So that's great. From a socioeconomic standpoint, the project generated a lot of work for local companies and local folks. We had just under 400,000 worker hours on site, so that's incredible. And most of the subcontracting community was either from Ottawa or from Gatineau proper. So those are all very important things. I'm just going to speak a little bit about the sustainability and the Canadian greening aspect. I mean, our approach was, I'll call it simple, using the Clean Quebec grid. But what was very challenging and what required us to innovate and our designers to innovate was to use that energy, but also be, very, very careful in how we managed it to be able to meet the stringent energy targets that were in place. And that's where the challenge truly was. And we did that through a number of ways. We used heat reclaim was one of the primary ways we did it. A little bit of geothermal as well, and obviously limiting, glazing and trying to make sure that our exterior envelope was very high performance within the pre-insulated precast panels. And all these things were able to come clear to us in the CCMs in discussions with LDC. So that was good when we first put in the bid. The other thing I would say is that the Canadian Government Greening Initiative is changing. We already heard some new announcements and some changes since we submitted, and some new announcements on green procurement just a couple of weeks ago. And I think certainly there's going to be a challenge there when it comes to embodied carbon in concrete and things of that nature. The industry hasn't necessarily been able to bring those kinds of technologies to scale yet. But initiatives like that and guidelines are certainly going to push it. So it's interesting to see where it's going to lead. Obviously, in the short term or medium to short term, it probably lead to some cost impacts. But I think the industry will evolve, and at some point it'll bring it all to scale, and the affordability will be there. So pass it on to Brad.
Thank you. I'll pick up a little bit where Paul talked about, the question is both greening and socioeconomic impact. On the socioeconomic side, for certain, not only are we able during the build to use local resources and local companies, we're providing procured opportunities in the local area for 3 decades, right? And so, we can enter into and drive a really competitive environment from a value for money perspective, which is great for us and great for the government of Canada. But we're also able to provide long-term certainty for local subcontractors. And so whether they're doing groundskeeping and snow clearing, whether they're working with our mechanical implements, it's a subcontracted model. And so the way that Equans does their work generally is we have a certain number of staff on site, and then all those other specialized services are generally subcontracted. And that way, when you're entering the marketplace, you're using existing resources and you don't have to generally scale up in such a significant way. On the environmental side, the socioeconomic impact is really important from a greening perspective. So, we heard a little bit about the Western forest frog, which is really, really small, just so you know, it's a really, really small frog. And so when you're operating in that kind of habitat, both for the design build and obviously for operating ongoing, you're able to help contribute with your building and your operation to the biodiversity crisis. That's a remarkable thing to do from an infrastructure perspective. We never hear those words together ever. Right. And so that has a very important social economic impact because, of course, solving the biodiversity crisis means you're increasing the livability of your communities. And so you can go to the people of Gatineau and you can say, hey, we built this giant building. We built it in endangered species habitat. And guess what? They're continuing to thrive. And, anecdotally, there are deer that come to the back. We're in these offices all the time. I told her she can't feed them, but and so you're really starting to talk about design, build, and operate in harmony with the natural environment around it and in an urban environment. So that's a remarkable story to tell for all of us, including for the government of Canada. The last thing I would say is, in respect of the greening strategy, our expertise is in life cycle and energy management. And so we have an opportunity to take the building that's built and the building that's renovated or is rehabilitated over time, to help to meet those strategies. And the less carbon in the air, the better the air and the water is, the more we're helping to be part of the mitigation of climate change. And so, infrastructure and industry are arguably the most important parts of the fight against climate change. And so when you do this kind of thoughtful development and this kind of thoughtful operation, it feels really good to be part of it.
Thank you very much. And, and I think that you really touch on hugely important element as we go forward. Being thoughtful about the environment and the environment that we're going to leave for our children is so critical. So on that note, PPG, so Plenary Properties Gatineau, when they developed their proposal, they had the following text. This project will provide an example to be followed for future P3 projects across Canada and North America, how design excellence can be achieved in a cost-conscious manner, and how new and exciting infrastructure can be delivered in a harmonized fashion. Huge goals and objectives that they were expressing there, very ambitious. And we're very excited to say that they, not only did they deliver, and they delivered above the expected standard with LEED Gold achieved. So a really great job. But they did this on time, on budget, and in the middle of a global pandemic. So incredible work, and I think that's a platform they laid there. Over the past years, our partnership has been tested. It's been an interesting, an exciting ride over the last 3-4 years. The contract was tested, and everybody up here has had to make sacrifices. Corporations, government, we all had to make sure that we were making decisions that were in the best interest of the project, and in the end, in the best interest of Canadians. So before we discuss the factors that led to success for the project, I'd like to ask you, starting with Natalie, can each of you address some of the key challenges that you encountered and how you were able to overcome them during this project? Thank you.
I think for us at LAC, and it's not just at LAC, I think it's in the federal government, there's a lack of P3 knowledge and experience. There's only a handful list of P3s that we can talk about that were developed and implemented. Compared to Infrastructure Ontario or Infrastructure BC, we have a lot more P3 projects under their belt. This being said, we had to rely on external advisors to help us. And we did learn really quickly. Eddie and I, like, our learning curve was pretty steep, to say the least. The other challenge that we had, and I'm not going to talk about Paul, like I kept telling him, like, you were going to be perceived as the superhero, you know, handing a gold facility on a silver budget, but
Basically Thor, right? Is that
exactly exactly it. But I think for us, also adapting within the culture of the government of Canada in delivering, you know, on performance and reporting, the fact that it's a P3, we transferred the risk to the private partner when we signed the contract during design construction. Having to report on design and construction and identify, you know, if are they on track or their risk, whether, and that's one thing I kept saying, whether or not they would have started construction 2 months before, they still had to deliver on time. Otherwise, there was some performance issues there. Being able to report created some issues for us. It was more difficult. We managed, but still. I think also for us was delivering such a large scale project. I mean, at one point it was listed as the larger infrastructure project for the government of Canada in the National Capital Region, with a team of, there was 5 of us, 6 of us at one point. That was very challenging. But the good story is talking about the issues, how we dealt with them, and also a demonstration for the government of Canada of what it means to have good risk allocation for us. I'm not sure if you guys would say the same thing, but on our side, it worked wonders. So, thank you.
One of the, like Natalie said, we had never done P3, we had the Champlain Bridge in RT, but it was a different team, they were extremely busy, so we had got limited context. And it's a completely different project than Gets the 2 building in our archival center. So we had little experience, little knowledge, but the big challenge was really to get up to par with the requirement, I guess, for the job. So I did a lot of research, consulted with a lot of people, even during the CCMs. We asked questions to the 3 bidders and they helped us really understand their side of the business. That was the biggest challenge, I think, for me at the beginning. And I have an example, once we signed the contract, we had, one thing we hadn't figured out or thought about was the plenary. So when we have a change, plenary has some costs that we're not pricing the contract. So we have to negotiate those. At some point, Amy was frustrated, let's say. She was asking me why I would not allow them to make profit. That's when I remember during my research that collaboration was the key element for successful P3. So I said, oh, maybe I didn't clearly explain our position. So we went back to, I understood our frustration. So then we engaged in an actual productive discussion to come up with a solution. And I think since then we haven't really thought about a few dollars because it's still public money, but that's nothing major. Also, yeah, I think we established a strong collaborative, like Scott was saying, it's like a marriage. Communication is always going to be extremely important because we're dealing with individuals, and I think having frank and open discussions, but not being hurt by them. And I think we need some people with different personality, and I think we have that on this project, which is a really important portion of this. The actual people working on the project.
Just to finish up on your point, a reasonable amount of profit. Up there. Yeah, in thinking about this question, I think I did think long and hard about it because we did have a lot of challenges on the project. You know, Natalie has a bingo card of all the things that we experienced that she could probably share later as additional material. But you know, I think one aspect that is very unique to this project is the fact that we're assuming an existing facility on a site adjacent to an active construction site. And it kind of checked all the boxes for me in terms of, you know, the way that plenary sits in terms of our consortium structure. It's like myself, it'll be Paul's team, CL, and then Brad's team, and we all have to work together. And I'm the lead, kind of the one throat to choke from a client perspective. And so, you know, I think there were a lot of that phase was very challenging for us. I think it's not a usual thing to have an operation start so soon. So relationships have to be built quickly, partnerships have to be built quickly to have, you know, the trust required to hand over this building you've been taking care of so well for so long to a new counterparty. So I think that part definitely was difficult. You know, it's also unique to take over it immediately became the oldest building in our portfolio as well. I'm happy to say it was very well cared for. So, you know, it's currently being maintained, and it's not our biggest problem project in our portfolio, but it was a thing for us to wrap our heads around, is that we're taking on a 25-year-old facility. The transition also happened at a very turbulent time. We took on the building April 1st of 2020, which I don't think you can choose a worse time to have to do that. Especially with something, and Brad can probably attest to this more, is you need to be there, right? You need to be speaking to people, you need to be understanding the facility, in the facility, understanding what you're taking on. And a lot of that either was condensed or couldn't happen, or happened virtually. So I think, you know, that definitely was a highlight from a challenge perspective for me. And, you know, some of the ways that I was thinking about how we work through this, I think, well, actually, before I go there, the time that we normally would spend dedicated to each phase of the project, I was finding from Natalie's point of view and Olivier, you know, now we're splitting our time. We're focusing on the FM aspect and the design construction aspect at the same time, and trying to make sure that both are being addressed, but to a reasonable amount. And so I think some of the ways I think what we did well in terms of overcoming that is to really create some work streams, both formally and informally. So we, you know, we have our formal meetings that we needed to have as part of our project agreement requirements, but also we had informal touch bases many times a week, which have gone for the full 4 years, really, with both the FM side to focus on the FM issues, and also on the design and construction side to really keep focus on that as well. So I think that was one good way that we really collaborated to make sure that was the case. Also, in doing so, I was conscious about trying not to create silos, because that was also we had to work in an integrated manner, and there are ties to the existing facility. The two facilities are now physically connected, so there was definitely that collaboration and integration that needed to happen. And I thought we tried to do our best to make sure that everyone was aware of you know, all the aspects that they needed to be aware of on the other side of the fence. And, we definitely had I would say a little bit of a rough time kind of getting the project going. I want to be honest about that. I think that's what we're here to talk about is our real challenges. The one thing I really thought, despite some of those difficult conversations we needed to have, we had the conversations, they were open, transparent, honest, and I think that was the way that we were able to quickly understand where the other side was coming from, to be able to quickly address the issue is that directness and clarity of the problems that we were being encountered. Really helped to change the trajectory, I think, faster overall. And also, those discussions didn't tarnish future discussions. And I think that was another key takeaway when I think about the success in this project is sometimes if you have difficult conversations, it's hard to go into the next one with an open mind and energetic and enthusiastic. But I think Natalie's team has always came to us like that. And I think we tried to do the same. And if we had a difficult conversation yesterday, it doesn't mean it's going to change or we have a blank slate today. It's a new challenge to address today. And that's one thing I think was great from a project perspective for us.
Thanks, Cindy. I'm going to talk about two challenges that kind of are good examples for how the partnership worked well. I'll talk about the easier one first. COVID-19, believe it or not, was probably the easier of these two challenges. In the end, we were shut down by the province. But during that time, I think our teams did a good job of really planning, how we're going to come back, how we're going to implement the new work procedures, and also being very clear about what the potential impacts could be, whether it be delayed, whether it be productivity issues. So we really didn't know. As a company, luckily, PCL has a lot of depth across North America, and we're able to leverage some of those lessons and good work practices to help LAC. And I think in the end, aside from the closure, we didn't have any notable site shutdowns or impacts to productivity. So I think that's a testament to how well the team worked and how well we were able to prepare ourselves to get back to work after the shutdown. So very proud of that, and we made it through. Now the second one, I remember the day very well. It's actually the day we were closing on the library. I got a phone call in the morning saying that we had a little bit of an issue with some of our precast panels on the project. Well, in the end, it ended up being a localized structural failure during construction, and it took us a few days to make some decisions. But I remember calling Natalie on a Sunday. She was up in Maniwaki visiting family and saying, "I need to talk to you." She said, "Okay, yeah, we'll chat on Monday, no problem." And I said, "Nah, I need to talk to you now."
The constructor calls on a Sunday and says, "We need to talk now." You just jump in your car
And you go.
and you go. Exactly.
Now on site, I
Yeah.
won't tell you over the phone.
I mean, Natalie knew that there had been an issue on the previous Thursday, but that we were working through it. The message was I had to communicate to her was that we've decided the best way to do this is to deconstruct part of the building and kind of start from scratch, make safe, and figure out how we move forward. So a very good example for how risk transfer works, because we had full responsibility to correct and deal with that issue. What we were looking for from LAC and PSPC was a partner that was patient, because I know, when you have something like that happen, and there's visibility from outside from the public, et cetera, patience in how we were going to respond, and also trust that we were going to respond and we're going to respond adequately. And I think in the end, our design team and our construction team developed a very elegant solution that allowed our design to maintain and also allowed us to deliver on time. And that a large part was the patience and the trust that we had between our various partners. So.
And trust doesn't just come overnight. It builds up to there. And I think also at LAC, we felt really confident that health and safety was also a major concern for you guys, not just the cost down the line. You really did make sure that everything was safe. So that was a reassurance for us. I also want to say it was the first time since working with Scott that I did not wish him happy birthday. That will happen on his birthday.
We didn't plan it that way. Brad?
Thank you. Just a few challenges that kind of occur from an operator's perspective. And of course, we talked about the fact that you're building a new building and also taking on an existing facility that is a little bit older. One of the challenges that I would start you with is that even though you've written the contract, all 1,836 pages, you've never actually used it before. And P3 contracts are really different. They're really complicated generally. They do download the risk through those kinds of complications. But it's not a vendor contract like you've been used to doing all of this time. It's not a build contract. It's really, really different. And so, you know, my partners here talked about, we didn't start off very well, and that's really quite true. And that happens because it's a brand new P3 contract, and it happens to every client every time. This is my 9th P3 contract, and all of them start the same way. And so, you know, one of the challenges was to really partner closely together while that learning curve starts to happen, because it's really, really quite different. And so, you know, we didn't talk extensively, but we held a partnering session. That was one of the best meetings I've had in my whole career. We spent an entire day together. We talked about expectations, and it started us off on really a great, honest, thoughtful track for the future as partners. Because with a 30-year plus contract, you really are partners. You're not just vendor and client. The second real interesting challenge was the challenge of the Ottawa Gap labor market. Everybody bilingual, secret security cleared with 10 years experience is already working. In fact, they're working for you. And so for Equans in particular, the challenge was finding people in the labor market. Now, COVID has made that quite a bit harder, right? With the great retirement or the great quitting or whatever we're going to call it. And so the labor market is even more challenged now, obviously. And so, you know, it's really, really important that you have an understanding relationship when you're unable to completely staff in some instances, because the contractual requirements still exist, right? And so again, you really will lean on the relationship there with your partner as you try to solve that problem. And that's going to be an ongoing problem for quite some time, is what I expect. The last thing I would say is the challenge of communication is always the challenge. The standard of practice in the federal public service is incredibly high. It's very structured. You communicate in a very particular way. You have approval processes, and lots of things that the private sector doesn't necessarily have. And so bringing that together at the start is a real challenge as well. I'm a little more uniquely positioned because I was a public servant for 15 years, so I understand that a little bit. But if you create really good structures in the partnership to communicate, and so Amy talked about these regular meetings where the contract sits over here and you have honest conversations. If you take a really structural approach to communicating, it really starts you off well. And you meet regardless, even if you have very little to talk about, so that it's like flexing a muscle, and it really, really contributes to that success as well.
Thank you very much, Brad. Speaking, those meetings that Brad's referring to are called the Amigos meetings. So right off the bat, it's a friendly group meant to get professional conversations started. You can say what you need to say. Sometimes it's difficult to hear for partners, but like a marriage, you have to have those difficult conversations. And I think that this group has been fantastic all the way along. And just to point out, you know, Brad talked about the buildings that we're talking about here. The Preservation Center is one of Canada's crown jewels as a building itself. Now the new preservation storage facility attached to it, and they're holding Canada's treasures. So for Library and Archives Canada, we have a unique mandate, and it is critical to us that the buildings be maintained at the highest standards. And Equans and Library Partners, the group, have a high challenge for them for the next 30 years, and we really appreciate all the great work they're doing. So rather than go, we have one more question that I'd like to come back to at the end. We'll probably need about 10 minutes for that, but I think we could turn it over and ask some questions from the audience if we have any. Right off the bat.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for that open sharing. It's definitely a reflection of the relationship there is between the public sector and private partners here in this project. And I want to go more into that in terms of like, how to become really an integrated team. And really like, how do you get to a point where you have that frank communication across the group? So, you know, you need to develop a partnership in the true sense of the word for this to work. So my question is mostly for the public servants. What hurdles, what cultural hurdles did you have to overcome so that you yourself were patient with the private partner? Patient and open and had that trust, right? Because I find like it's not really ingrained in us to have that. So how did you overcome that yourself personally?
That's a really good question. And for people who know me, they know I'm not patient. So I'm not one of those people that are really patient and, you know, take your time. I think from the onset, Olivier and I worked really, really closely together. You had your office and like you had a desk in our office. We sat at a table, we challenged each other, we knew the project agreement, we knew what we wanted out of the private partner and the partnership. We often forget about the P in partnership. Public, private, always. Partnership, we tend to forget. We sat together and we always came to the private partner with a common front. Like we never argued in front of, maybe sometimes, but no big deals, right? But seriously, we never argued in front of the private partner. We had a vision of how we wanted this project to be implemented, how we wanted it to be developed. And for us, it was also about being transparent, understanding, bring value for money. I'm not sure how many times I've said to the private partner, like, you should be happy. I'm spending your tax dollars. Like, you should be happy that I'm questioning you. Like, not being afraid to challenge. And it was always for the good of the project and not for individuals. So, Olivier, is there anything else?
I think you covered it all, but I think I would just say it started with the CCM when we, during the RFP period, when we had the communication with the three bidders. I can't speak of how it went, but I can say with all three, it went really well. There was, once we engaged, I think Amy was telling me before the first session, they were comfortable. We felt we were a bit close, but I think we developed into something that was really meeting the intent of those sessions. And we kind of took that over to the contract management period. We already knew the people. I know that the team is different when you go from the team that pursues for contracts and the team that's actually doing the work. But there was a smooth transition. We worked with some of the people like Albert, who's worked with Amy, moved from RFP to the contract management. So I think that kind of the tone for the contract management thing.
Also, I think we were so engaged in this process, so proud of this project that it transpired onto you guys. I think like you guys knew that it wasn't just another project. It was the project, right?
Yeah. So, and let's jump in there, Paul. But I think, and Natalie said it really well, that we have a really dedicated group of servants that are really fully committed to the project all the way along. But it also came from the fact that we really got a great feeling through all these meetings, through the open communication, that you could have the difficult conversations and that all that, it takes time, as was pointed out earlier, it takes time to build up that trust and confidence that you can, everybody's working together to achieve for the best of the project overall. So, Paul, you mentioned that.
I just want to say that the passion that not only Natalie and Scott had, but the rest of the team for the project certainly made for a very enjoyable process and definitely rubbed off on our teams as well. So that was a big part of it too. I think establishing that trust.
Okay.
I won't do that.
Okay.
You don't talk very much about performance measurements, but it's something that always fascinates me. Because here you have a 33, they count the beginning. So how does one establish the performance measurement, that you're going to do? Do you actually establish it and then is it cast in stone? Do you adjust it as you go, formally, informally? Here's how you handle performance measurement.
Just for Brad, I'm gonna say it's cast in stone,
Well, there goes my answer.
just for you. An answer just for you. So during the design construction, it's really difficult to establish performance measurement, as we said, because there is on the private partner. What we did not say either is that the private partner doesn't get a dime until we achieve substantial completion and we receive the keys. That's when we provide like a down payment or a substantial completion payment. So it's difficult to make performance measurement. During the design construction phase, what we do is that we review 30%, 60%, 90% design drawings and then construction drawings. And that's how we provide feedback, but it's not performance. During the operational period, that's very different. When the private partner develops their bids, we've already indicated a list of a few pages of performance indicator going from no more than 5 centimeters of snow on the ground to lights or things like this need to be changed at 80% of their life cycle to make sure that there's not burn lights everywhere, for a preservation center as well, which is very specific. We need to make sure that the collections in the existing facility, the preservation center, is going to last the 300 years established. There's 48 vaults that have each a very specific environmental set point, like 18 degrees with 35% humidity, for example. The private partner is restricted in performance to plus or minus 2 degrees or plus or minus 5% over a 24-hour period. So there's really, really strict performance indicators that are drafted in the project agreement at the beginning, like even before it's published, to allow equans to assess costs and risks and bid on this, on the project.
Maybe I can do a little bit of a follow-on though, that over 30 years, the science behind archives, I suspect, changes. So how do you adjust over the 30 years plus, those measurements of 5 centimeters or, whatever it was?
So for the vaults, we have consulted with the Canadian Conservation Institute. We've established an environmental set point that would allow us a brand new piece of paper to be still readable in 500 years. If we were to change the environmental set point, there's a process in the project that allows us to do a change. And we would write up a change for the private partner to change those environmental set point, and the private partner would cost that change in terms of energy, but also in terms of mechanical and electrical equipment that is needed to support this.
I think that it's really important that when you have a contract of that length, you have to have the kind of language in there that provides for everything from exigent circumstances to the passage of time, right? And the change of markets and the change of law. And so, well, you have all the things that are around force majeure or all those other kinds of things that you'd be really used to in contract law. You also have the ability to literally change the contract in agreement with each other and also adjust the commercial terms, which is why the private partner is here. So, and you're relying on the private partner's expertise to say, well, that's going to impact the life cycle this way. It's going to impact operations and maintenance this way annually over the remainder of the concession term. It's a really reasonable process that's written in, and in this contract, it's very, very well written. And so, we're already operating in that environment already in terms of changes, that are affecting the existing building and the brand new building. And also, there's a reasonability that comes with the partnership, which is an understanding that sometimes there's going to be circumstances beyond Equan's control. And so you do seek relief in some cases. You do talk about supervening events. You do talk about the kinds of temporary repairs or other things that are necessary that might otherwise be performance measured, but in the reasonability of the partnership makes sense. And that's why P3s really work.
a really good example of what you're talking about. So Natalie wrote this contract, wrote the terms of the agreement, based on the greening government strategy that was in place just before going into tender. And then the greening government strategy changed. So it went from an 80% reduction by 2050 to greenhouse gas emissions to now targeting 100% reduction by 2050. So an excellent example of the kinds of things that over a life of a contract, you need to be prepared and have mechanisms in place to allow you to address that. So now we'll be working closely with EPONs to figure out what can we do to further enhance the quality of the preservation center, for example, to meet the new targets. Maybe one last thing, in planning, you also should be thinking not just about what the standards are today, but what they're likely going to be. Another example is accessibility, which is changing dramatically. What will it be 20 years, 30 years from now in expectations? So don't just meet standard, because that's really the minimum.
Thank you, because I think from a procurement perspective, I'm always amazed at how people view there'll be no change. And they assume there'll be no change over that life of the contract. And I guess I'm 40 years in, I would say there's always change. So thank you. Let's turn over to Trevor. You've got a question?
Yeah, we have some questions from online. First one is, it'd be great if there was information or data that could be shared on the environmental achievements. Are there case studies available? And where else would practitioners go to get additional resources?
What is meant by environmental achievements? Is it sustainability or?
I have a mic. This came in early on in the panel, so I suspect it had was while you were talking about the environmental achievements with the frogs.
Yeah, just summarize.
I guess if you want, people reach out to myself and I could redirect the question internally to one of the partner, or I could answer myself if there's a.
Okay.
I was just gonna say, yeah, in terms of case studies too, we'll probably touch on it. We are preparing a case study right now with C2P3. We're in the throes of drafting this, so not quite ready yet for consumption, but I'm sure we could share it with whoever to be able to distribute that at some point.
Council or probably private
sorry,
partnership. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Next question is, what most influenced the development of the partnership? Oh, no, sorry, we went over this one. Do you have advice on how to include performance management or benefits realization clauses in a P3 agreement?
Some lessons from this one. Seriously, I think for us, and we just met with another project, Government of Canada project that's being developed as a P3, and you know, there's various ways to address performance indicators. It could be transitional, like it could be, you know, for the first few years you could focus on this one, or it could be depending on the climate or what you feel like a result of the last year, you want to focus on specific ones, but it depends on the type of project. Is it vertical infrastructure, or is it more a rail or train or bridges? But there is a lot to consider when we're doing this. Take the time, sit down, think about what's most important for you in terms of indicator. What could keep you up at night? And this is what should be attached to a performance indicator.
Actually, surprisingly, what none of us have mentioned, I'm really surprised, is the few words that we heard and continue to hear all the time, which is, how does it impact the collection, right? And so if you think about how strategy develops generally, you have one overriding message, right? And so that's the one thing that I've heard from Natalie more than anything probably over a long period of time is like, well, how will that impact the collection, right? Because the collection is the most important thing. It's why the buildings are there. It's why we're doing the work, and et cetera. And so if you were thinking about your performance management ongoing, you would start with what's the most important thing. And that was really well articulated, and I'm really surprised none of us have said it until now.
No, I just wanted to add, I think one of the key elements is to think about what you're going to do with information you're requesting. If you ask for too much, if you don't need to have that information, you're going to waste everybody's time. We ask for something to be developed, cost us money. So I think that's one of the lessons learned we've had on our project. Maybe some of the things we're asking or monitoring or not that use in monitor.
So my colleague just reminded me that there's a really important structural aspect to the contract in terms of how you do reporting. There's a monthly report that some days I like and some days I don't. But it's a really comprehensive overview of the events of the last 30 days. It happens every month. It's contractual. It's linked directly to all the key performance indicators in the contract. It's developed over a 7-ish day period following the month, and it's a remarkable snapshot of what happened. You know, it has an executive summary, so it's the kind of thing you could take and put in a briefing note or a deputy's note or something as well, but it also has the tremendous amount of detail, I would argue, in the appendices as to, you know, down to the event and day level, right? So there's a really great accountability structure in reporting, and reporting obviously is going to be very important for you. So that would be another thing. Thanks for reminding me.
And for me, the less pages on the report, the more successful the month was.
Very interesting. Last one from online here is, do you have an advocate design team on the owner side to provide technical advice?
Yes, of course we do. We have GRC Dialogue and Joint Venture that are providing advocate architect services, and from, you know, structural to landscape to mechanical and electrical engineers. We also have P1 Consulting that's providing FM advice and expertise. We have, in addition to that, we also have, like, we've worked with Deloitte, we've worked with KPMG, we've worked with Tyree for the more technical project management side. Yeah.
Carolyn, you go.
Yeah, actually, I have a question. Going back to risk management, obviously, P3 projects are all about sharing risk. Seems like you guys work together greatly together. I guess my question is, was there a particular point on contention on a part of your project that, you know, wasn't going to be private industry, or was it going to be government assuming that risk, or was that fairly straightforward, just based on what was in the RFP?
Maybe I can talk about an example during the RFP. We had a latent defect clause because we had the existing building, and the way it was written, the private partner had to assume a lot of risk during the CCM. I can't speak about that. I feel like we had it brought up by one or more of the bidders, and we actually did another analysis. Maybe the flaw, the way we assigned that risk, was not acceptable to the market at that point. So we, during the RFP, made an amendment, and we decided that this risk would remain with the client for the most part. Okay.
I would say for other risks, everything was so clear and perfect.
Yes, yes, I'm sorry, Captain.
Yeah.
I think it's a good opportunity to speak to the opposition. As far as the.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I guess I can speak more broadly to the permitting aspect of the project. So one of the things that we're looking for, and again, we got a sense out of it through the CCMs on this project, is, you know, how are we going to kick off the project well? In this particular case, we got a lot of permits to get. From our perspective, our risk mitigation plan was we continued design from the time we submitted our technical submission all the way until preferred component and until close, because we wanted the design to be ready to be able to start the permitting aspect of things, because there's a big risk to the schedule. And what we found out through the CCMs, and I encourage anybody who is looking to put in place a P3, is that LEC did a very good job of socializing the project to all the folks that had to issue permits for us: NCC, ECCC, the Ministry of Environment in Quebec, the City of Gatineau, et cetera. Which, so I mean, they didn't do the work for us. We still had to do the design, do all the legwork, but they were aware, and that was huge. And you know, from the perspective of the Western Chorus Frog, we had to put. So I'm going to correct something Brad said. The building is not built on Western chorus frog habitat.
Okay.
The habitat is adjacent, and there was a portion of the site that we had to use during construction that's going to be revegetated. But there's an exclusion fence that was installed before we started, and the timing of that didn't coincide well with when the contract, when commercial close ended. So LAC went ahead and installed that exclusion fence, which allowed us to start construction when we wanted to. So that was a big part of it. The other thing I would say is we want, as a design builder, we'd like our design to be as consistent as when we submit it. We want it to stay the same essentially, and that's what makes the project successful for us. And what LAC did really well, one, the PA was very well written, and we said the CCMs were very effective, but also the decision-making was exceptionally well managed. And the governance on that side, to go from the user groups to clear feedback to us on how we had to modify our drawings or how our drawings were okay was significant, because that allowed us to get through that stage quickly and get into construction. So those are very key elements, I think, in really starting off the design build process. Lots of questions.
I think, and to mitigate risk, what we did is we established like a governance structure internally and consultation structure that allowed us to provide timely feedback to the private partner.
So we're now about 7 minutes from close of this meeting, and we want to respect everybody's time. So if you might in the audience, you can stick around and ask more questions after. Well, what I'm going to do is just give a couple of minutes, or really like a minute each, to say some high level lessons learned and or point out key elements of success that you haven't already spoken to, perhaps that you'd like to share with the audience. And maybe I'll start at the far end with Amy as our lead to the private partners.
Sure. So yeah, I think we've referenced it in various comments here today, but the 4 Friends or 4 Amigos meetings that we implemented, I think is a key, an easy takeaway from the discussion we're having today, and was really a success, an element of success on our project. It allowed us a venue for, informal discussion. It allowed a venue to vent, It allowed us to connect more directly and more honestly, and I think it really helped us through a lot of the major challenges that we had on this project. And it is a plenary best practice. We try to implement this on other projects, but I want to highlight that it's not necessarily as successfully implemented at other projects as I found it to be here. And I think it's one thing to have the framework, but also to have, the execution or implementation of it. It was everyone's consistent attendance, motivation and drive and enthusiasm and open and honest conversations that really made those forums successful. And I think it's one of the highlights for me on the project generally.
So I think, like Amy said, communication has been a strong part of the success of this project. And just one example, when we issue amendments, usually for those who work in procurement, as simple as making your amendment, drafting it, sending it, she signed it, and we're done. But for this, it's also after I talked with Amy, we had a really simple amendment for an SRCL. And if we went with a regular amendment, then it meant she had to go to her lawyers, to the lenders. So a lot of people that would cost a lot of money, take a lot of time for ultimately a very minor change, so that we just adapted, communicated the challenges. And I said, well, let's use the change process. It's a no cost change, and we just went down. So I think communication has been great and essential part of that success. Another thing, the governance, I think Paul was saying, not only the governance within Government of Canada, which was awesome, I have to say, we had great discussion from the ADM at LOC to the working level. But also once we established a project, we had a partnership session at the beginning where everybody worked together, like meetings where we learned to work with different people that we only saw the other side. It was the procurement, it's often us versus them. Now we had to get together and build a team, people, members. And it doesn't mean we're just gonna say yes every time you request something. We still challenge them. They challenge us as well. I think it's a very healthy relationship.
Yeah, I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record here, but I think communication was key as well. Certainly, it didn't matter what time of day. I could call Natalie and she'd pick up her phone if we had something to chat about or discuss. And that's huge. You don't see that a lot. The fact that we're all still talking to each other is also, great. And that's never changed. So I think that's incredible. And it's yielded some very, very good results here for this project. And I'd build another one with this group anytime.
Thanks, Paul. I think for me it is to be proactive as the owner or the project authority, just getting things on track, being proactive, having discussions with internal and external stakeholders in advance. It does pay off down the line. I think the fact that the private partners saw that we were knowledgeable, informed, that we were active and we were able to answer some of their questions. I tried to get what it meant in terms of percentage of cost and, reducing the risk. I was never able to get that answer. No, not today. But I think it's worth it for the government of Canada. The second thing is always keep the P partnership in mind. We did have some difficult discussions. We've learned a lot throughout. Brad is no longer sending me letters an hour before my holiday. There's a few things, but it's never personal. Always keep a professional mind. How to deal with adversity. I mean, Amy spoke about the bingo card. Bingo card is, we need to explain, it's like at one of our governance meetings, we were talking about risks and things that you never thought would happen in a project like this, like a global pandemic. Who thought? It was written down in the project, but we never thought it would happen. And Scott was like, oh, we need a bingo card just to demonstrate the things that, and of course, we delivered. We provided a visual to explain to senior management what it meant. Never take anything for granted. In doubt, write it down. Like I did often during meetings, we'd send an email after just to make sure it was clear. Like there was no room for interpretation. Although I really trust them, don't trust myself, so I do send an email, I guess. Let's put it this way. We also need to be able to learn to let go, because as Paul mentioned, design construction is responsibility of the constructor, FM, life cycle, it's under Brad's responsibility. I have to be able to let go and trust that they will implement. One last thing, today is the International Women's Day. Our project was delivered with a team of great women. I mean, in this case, there wasn't that many men on our project. So I'm really proud of it. Not proud that there was no men, but.
It's okay. I live in a house exclusively full of women.
So you understand.
Yeah. The only thing I would add is that you're not just it's not, I said it before, it's not just a client vendor relationship, it's a partnership, and it's really important. And make sure that as well as you've written your contract, you understand that it's malleable in the long term. It is interpretive. Think about it like public policy, right? I mean, you do have to think about it as having been applied differently from the circumstances you assumed that would be when you wrote it, because I guarantee you, like you said, it'll happen. And so look at your partners that way. We're in a contractual relationship with a different government that doesn't look at it that way, and it's a non-stop dispute.
Thank you, Brad. So one couple final thoughts, the PM partnership. It only happens if you put yourself in the other shoes. So I think we saw that all the way along this project. We're all partners. We're willing to look at the issues and challenges from the other side of the point of view. Being available at any time. It's not a 9-to-5 job to be the project director of a major project like this, because the problems happen on a Sunday afternoon when you're visiting your mother in Milwaukee. So Natalie, the whole team was exceptional for that. And thank you very much to this great group for being on this team, delivering such an incredible project. Also, as a director of general of real property, pick a project manager that understands the 9-to-5 job and will be waiting to deliver on your brainwave, which might be the bingo card, whatever it might be. So thank you very much. Thank you to RPIC and the CIPMM or PMM. And over to you.
Thank you. I want to also iterate thanks to Amy, Paul, Natalie, Olivier, Brad, and Scott. In particular, I found that answer to that last question probably, why we really wanted to have this session. Because they actually shared with us a number of ideas that I think are transportable to those other projects. I think that, sorry. Seem to turn yourself off.
You're back.
Sorry, seem to turn myself off. I think we all actually focus on, the big projects are exciting to work on. And sometimes come 1, 2, 3 times in a career. But most of us actually need to think about some of these lessons for those other projects. Because I think that it's often, because it's been done in a larger project, we can justify to our management that, yes, we can do it in the smaller ones. And again, thank you all. This was a fascinating discussion. Much appreciated.
Thank you, everyone.
That really was going to be my question.